Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming. My name is Paul Mitchell, and I have the honor to be your host this afternoon and Master of Ceremonies. But before we get going, I'm introduce David Jorst, who is the Chief Juggler, apparently, for the ISOC DC chapter, and our co-organizer for this session. So give David the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is David Viors, and I'm the Executive Director of the DC chapter of the Internet Society, as well as the co-chair of the Internet Governance Forum for the U.S., the IGF USA. In these roles, we come across a lot of the issues, that lay ahead for the Internet. But I don't think there's any so essential than like keeping the Internet and keeping it whole. Internet fragmentation is a multifaceted challenge and a multifaceted subject. That's why I'm so proud of this series. This is the first event in a 4-part series that will look at the technical elements, the political elements, and the commercial elements of Internet fragmentation. Today's event will be an overview of those. I'd like to thank everybody that helped and worked so hard to make this happen, particularly Carolyn Nguyen at Microsoft and Stephanie Goldberg at Microsoft, as well as Laura and the rest of our distinguished and amazing panel, and our even more distinguished and amazing keynote. I'm going to let Paul introduce him now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to see all of the people here. And just to let you know that if you want to tweet, please tweet with hashtag fragmentation. And you will see it on the screen here, I think, to my left. So there's lots of discussion about fragmentation in lots of different formats and forums. For example, DNS content filtering or the operating of parallel IPv4 and IPv6 networks. There's geographic fencing and boundaries. There's concerns over cross-border data flows that impact cloud services. So some would say this is a real problem. Others would say this isn't so much a problem. Maybe it's going back to the good old days when we had trusted content and curated content, and we didn't have to worry about bad stuff coming across our borders. These developments that are either concerning or not, depending on your perspective, although I suspect everyone here will think they're concerning, are ultimately happening because the underlying design of the Internet as we know it actually facilitates the kind of fragmentation that we're seeing, because we have the opportunity to basically connect new devices, new protocols, new technologies all together and change the way it all works. So as David mentioned, our goal is to try to bring together over the series policy stakeholders, technology people, academics, so industry folks, civil society, all to talk about and expand the dialogue and the awareness of what these issues are and how they should be addressed from a policy perspective. This is the opening dialogue in this 4-part series. We'll try to set the stage. We want to shed some light on what are the different pressures that are actually giving rise to this trend towards fragmentation. When is it problematic, and when, if ever, is it desirable? How does it affect the social, economic, ethical, and political impacts on people, different scenarios? And at the end of the day, what should be done about it? What do we need to do in order to preserve or strengthen the system that we have or create the system that we want? So the next ones will examine from the fragmentation from a different perspective, as David, from different perspectives, technical, economic, and political. But to kick us off today, we're really honored to have Ambassador Danny Sepulveda, who's the Assistant Secretary of State and the U.S. Coordinator for International Communications and Information Policy in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs of the U.S. State Department. Long title. Really important person. Prior to joining the State Department, he served in the Senate for more than a decade in the Clinton and Obama administrations, and he's also a veteran of the nonprofit sector as well. He managed trade, immigration, interstate commerce, labor, and ethics and lobbying reform issues for Barack Obama from 2004 to 2008, and helped advise his campaign for president. Many of you will also know him from his extensive public engagements on Internet issues, including the WSIS Plus 10 high-level review last December, and most recently last week, the chairman of the WSIS Forum that was in Geneva. He received a Master of Public Affairs from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, as a Woodrow Wilson Fellow in Public Policy, International Affairs, and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and History from Emory University. So, Ambassador Sepulveda, welcome.
Wow, well, thank you all very much for being here. Thank you, Paul. I want to thank the Microsoft team and ISOC DC for convening the discussion that we're having here today. The open global interconnected internet is the backbone of the global digital economy. Its ability to enable the transfer of data and information across borders and between people and things is, we believe, our best hope for political, economic, and social progress in the world. Its fragmentation would constitute a grave threat to innovation, productivity, democratic discourse, and we believe the global public good. I think most of us, if not all of us in this room, would agree with that presumption. And we all work very hard against opposing forces. I wish we could say that there was only one threat or one place or one event where we could face and defeat those that seek to control, plan, or divide the internet for the purposes of forcing its users and developers to comply with either parochial political or economic interests. But internet fragmentation, if it occurs, will not occur because of a single moment. There won't be a single definitive action that results in fragmentation. Rather, if we're not vigilant, it will happen bit by bit, market by market, as the product of law and regulation constructed through a collusion between governments and incumbent interests that seek to reverse and contain what we believe is the democratic force of the internet. For those of us lucky enough to be among the more than 3 billion people connected to the internet today, its myriad of benefits are vividly apparent in our daily lives. It makes information easier to access. It makes business easier to conduct. It makes it easier for us to express ourselves freely and associate with others as we wish. And it shrinks social distances by easing our ability to communicate with our friends and relatives. It allows small entrepreneurs to challenge and disrupt traditional markets. It enables improvements and innovation in the operations of large firms that were previously slow to change. And from a social perspective, it allows any one of us to speak to and with all the rest of us. This is a development worth preserving. This is an opportunity worth spreading. From its conception in the 1970s, the internet was designed to connect disparate networks. Researchers had already been building small computer networks for years, but the key internet insight was that different individual computer networks could make their own local decisions about protocols and operations, yet still communicate with each other through a meta-level inter-networking architecture. Openness to individual design differences and local choice is still an integral part of the internet's DNA, both in technology and in its culture. And that this openness is not a key, it is the key to supporting the internet's nimble adaptability and broad use. That is why the concept of openness is prominent across the full range of international agreements and documents that drive cooperation, collaboration in this space. Although the internet originally connected just a handful of nodes, its technical foundations have been highly adaptable, allowing the internet to grow to its current scale, now connecting billions of devices worldwide, far beyond anything that its original creators ever envisioned. The data on the resulting economic benefits of this kind of internet connectivity are clear and compelling. By 2016, the internet economy will have expanded to $4.2 trillion in the G20 economies. If it were a national economy, it would rank as one of the world's top 5, behind only the United States, China, Japan, and India, and ahead of Germany. Overall, the internet contributes 5 to 9% to total GDP in developed markets. And in developing markets, the good news is the internet economy is growing at 15 to 25% per year. And unlike technologies built for a single purpose, the internet is a general purpose technology that adds value to many other industries. The 2011 McKinsey & Company report estimates that 75% of the internet's value added will actually be in traditional industries. As a function of design and operation, the global internet economy can respond to new technology and business opportunities fluidly and quickly and move across sectors as well. In addition to the internet's economic role, ICT technology has catalyzed a wide range of social benefits. Over recent years, the world has seen ICTs help people earn a living and pull themselves from poverty via mobile phone-based businesses and services. It has helped governments improve their transparency and fight against corruption using internet searchable land records and e-payments. It has helped capture and communicate social media messages, videos, and news coverage, allowing individuals to speak out publicly for change and to demand justice from their governments. Although we know that the internet's benefits are due to its scale and its openness, there are many sources of attention that are causing potential fragmentation in the internet along national, commercial, and technological boundaries. At the State Department, we are particularly focused on the actions of governments in this regard. A McKinsey analysis indicates that a GDP growth of $250 billion and $450 billion accrues annually from the free flow of data. At the global level, citing both national security needs and a desire for more quote-unquote democratic internet governance processes, some countries are advocating for intergovernmental control of the internet, rather than the multi-stakeholder model that has worked well thus far. At the United Nations, we have pushed back strongly against ardent attempts by some authoritarian regimes seeking a greater control for governments and internet governance, including the management of critical internet resources. And we've been successful in the most recent of those negotiations and conversations. We are also seeing a push for prematurely mandated technology convergence, particularly in emerging areas like the Internet of Things, which we fear would inadvertently restrict rather than foster innovation. At the national level, we are seeing some governments adopt policies and regulations that restrict trans-border data flows and impose market access barriers such as data localization and duty of care requirements for the importation of ICT goods and services. In extreme instances, we are seeing countries create their own rules for governing their, quote, national internet, unquote, separate from long-standing global processes that have proven effective worldwide. But where those governments choose to reduce friction in the digital economy, where they act to open their data flows, a Boston Consulting Group study showed that compared to other similar markets, open markets experience a real difference of 1% in GDP growth. Closed countries, those which deny their people the freedom to engage in commerce and discourse, are falling behind, and they are not growing at the rate that they could be. We must celebrate, champion, and work with those who want to break down barriers to the growth of the digital economy and engage those who wish to create digital walls in respectful discourse and debate. So how do we win that debate and bring more public and private leaders into our coalition? One of our primary challenges is closing the digital divide and expanding opportunity and access to the digital networks of the world. It is both an economic and a moral imperative that the development and deployment of ICTs reduces inequality and spreads opportunity everywhere. The internet can only be an engine for growth, obviously, if it's available to people. Roughly 3 out of every 5 people in the world remain without internet access, and in the poorest countries, that can top 95%. As we seek to connect the next 4 billion people to the internet, it is key that they are being connected to the global internet, not one that is segregated or censored. With that in mind, the State Department has launched its Global Connect initiative, an effort to bring an additional 1.5 billion people online worldwide by 2020. Since Undersecretary Novelli launched the Global Connect initiative last fall, which followed on Secretary Kerry's preview last May, the initiative has highlighted over 65 new and existing connectivity initiatives around the world, totaling more than $20 billion. Last month, the World Bank co-hosted with us a high-level event in which finance ministers, technology CEOs, NGO leaders, and the heads of the major multilateral development banks joined together to discuss next steps in this important issue. And that conversation was led and started off by the President of the World Bank and Secretary of State, John Kerry. Diplomatically, we have increased the political, bureaucratic, and financial resources committed to bilateral and multilateral engagement on digital economy and cyber issues. We are engaged in an increasing number of productive bilateral relationships and dialogues. We are facilitating training and capacity building both for our economic officers on the ground as well as our colleagues abroad that work in this space in foreign governments. And we are building multilateral coalitions of like-minded countries, such as the Freedom Online Coalition, to shore up cross-regional support for the principles of openness and interoperability. We must also focus our attention on making internet policy discussions more inclusive and accessible to stakeholders from around the world. We need to find ways to engage with diverse voices on internet governance and enable increased participation, particularly from the developing world, in both multi-stakeholder and multilateral processes. And in every country, we need to identify and engage young people, entrepreneurs, startup communities, and the technologically savvy so that they can become internal advocates for the preservation of the global open internet. And I know that ISOC does an immense amount of work in that space, and we're grateful for it. Finally, we have plenty of stories that support the linkage between internet openness and economic and social benefits. But what we don't have are sufficient numbers to back them up. More quantitative data and sharper definitions would help us advocate for a free and open internet abroad. The internet has served us well as a platform to provide anyone connected to it with an opportunity to contribute to political, economic, and social discourse. And we believe that is a very good and very important thing worth preserving and spreading. Key to the internet's preservation is our ability to retain both its cultural and technological openness and interoperability. These qualities help project to the world many of the freedoms and values that the United States and many others hold as central beliefs. That is why it is so important for all of us to engage in the global debates and to be mindful, choice by choice, of how through our many decisions and discussions around internet governance, we steer it on a path that avoids fragmentation and preserves openness. The benefits of each engagement in every conference and debate attended is not readily measurable on any one company's profit and loss ledger. The benefits of the advocacy for the preservation of the internet as a tool for the exercise of basic human rights is not felt immediately in each of our lives, but our collective work every week and every month across multiple forums, across multiple conferences, in the media, in legislatures, in the multi-stakeholder organizations that we participate in large halls and in small classrooms. That constant engagement is the best hope we have for the future of the internet and its potential to make all of our lives and the world better, and to preserve its utility as an open and interconnected single global network. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time, and I look forward to our conversation together.
Now I'd like to invite the panelists. There we go. All right. Jeremy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'll start by introducing the panelists here. We have quite a cast of characters, and I hope you'll find them all particularly interesting. Starting at my far left, we have Jeremy West, who's joining remote from Paris. So thanks for staying up a little bit later tonight. He's a competition lawyer with the experience at the OECD. He's also worked at a large Washington, D.C. law firm, the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division, and the New Zealand Commerce Commission. He's done papers on competition and economics that have been quoted and cited in various scholarly journals and in the Financial Times, and by an Advocate General of the European Court of Justice. And he's on the editorial boards of Antitrust Law Journal and Oxford Competition Law. So next to him, we have Daniil Karimi. He did high school in Turkmenistan, got a Bachelor of Law degree from Shandong University in China, and studied international business diplomacy and democracy in Prague, Budapest, and Vienna. He has a Master's in Advanced International Studies from the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, and finished the World Economic Forum's Global Leadership Fellowship in 2011, and was awarded an Executive Master in Global Leadership, and is currently an economics PhD program participant at Nankai University in Tianjin. And he's at the World Economic Forum. Next to him, we have Professor Laura Dinardis, a globally recognized internet governance scholar, professor and associate dean at the School of Communication at American University in Washington here. She's written lots of books, including The Global War for Internet Governance in 2014, 2014. She's an affiliated fellow of the Yale Law School Information Society Project and serves as executive director from 2008 to 2011, and is a senior fellow of the Center for International Government Innovation and a frequent keynote speaker at various prestigious universities and institutions. And coming this direction, we have Kathy Brown. Kathy Brown is the president, CEO of the Internet Society, and formerly she has had experience with Verizon. She's been on both sides of the sort of internet expansion. The Internet Society, of course, is the spiritual home and the center of the largest global network of people and organizations trying to keep the internet together and progress it further. Her career spans the public and private sector. She's been in the NTIA in government. She's been at Verizon. She received a JD summa cum laude from Syracuse and BA magna cum laude from Marist College, and served on the advisory boards of the Public Interest Registry, the Empowering Development Initiative of the ITU, and the USC Annenberg Innovation Lab. So please give them all a warm welcome, and thank you. And I'd like to start, we'll just go left to right here. I'll start, first of all, with you, Jeremy. I'm really curious, what is the OECD's particular interest in the fragmentation topic? In particular, what are the driving concerns that you're seeing, and what are you looking to accomplish ultimately with the work?
Sure. There's a little bit of a delay here in the call, so I hope that's not going to affect the quality too much. Is it okay on your end?
Yes, sounds good here.
Okay. So the OECD's interest in this topic stems from a couple of important documents that we already had out there for the past several years, starting with the 2008 declaration from our sole ministerial meeting, and then the 2011 Principles for Internet Policy Making. Both of those documents recognized a link between economic growth and social well-being on the one hand and internet openness on the other hand. So these documents were out there, but there has been a kind of nagging or stubborn perception, not only here at the OECD, but among many other stakeholder groups, that there are significant closing pressures or fragmentary pressures on the internet. And so fragmentation is an issue that we care about because it may be getting in the way of economic and social progress. We are in the sort of at the tail end of working on putting together a report about the economic and social benefits of internet openness. Unfortunately, the report isn't public yet, so I can't talk too much about substance, but I can talk a bit about, I think, like what I just said, why we did this, and maybe a little bit about the general approach that we took and are taking.
Great, thanks. We'll come back to that, I think. Daniil, the WEF released an interesting white paper at Davos this year that was entitled, Internet Fragmentation. And in that, the authors divide the fragmentation into three categories: technical, governmental, and commercial. And he has prop. Excellent. So I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit the rationale behind that particular taxonomy, and why did you decide to divide it that way instead of one of the myriad other possibilities?
That's right. Thank you, Paul. And first of all, hello to everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. I think my bio, being on the road, I may have sent the academic bio to Paul and Caroline, but it's very important to, rather than what I studied, is what I did at right now. And the World Economic Forum in the past few years really picked up the theme of digital economy and tried to address it from multiple angles, working with all the stakeholders, including ISO, including academia, including the governments. We in the past few years, the leadership that is convening at Davos every January really really addressed the issue of what are the barriers to the development of the digital economy, and Ambassador Spoletta has given us very good numbers around that. And we're thinking even a little bit even broader in terms of it's not about just economy. It's really we're seeing a transition. We're seeing an industrial transition every 100 years or so, and we're believing we're right now on the verge of the fourth industrial revolution, we're calling it, which really found a good resonance with multiple of those stakeholders. And if you go a few hundred years ago, it would be mechanization of production and automation of production and so on. And now we're seeing all these technologies converging, and internet is really one of the key drivers behind that. Why we decided to address that in the way we did in commercial, political, and technological fragmentation trends is for a very simple reason. It's because there are a lot of conversations around there in terms of fragmentary practices, but what we decided is just to somewhat categorize them and look and various dimensions in terms of impact, and in terms of the character, in terms of the likelihood of occurrence, and so on. So that's really one methodology tools. We're not claiming that this is the only methodology tools that is out there, and perhaps others have better ideas. We just decided to move the conversation forward.
Okay, thanks. And Laura, you've been active in the Global Commission on Internet Governance for quite some time, since its beginning, I think, right?
Yes.
And that commission has put out a number of papers along the way on various topics, including children's rights, privacy, the right to be forgotten, digital trade imbalances, and more. I'm wondering, can you describe how the Global Commission is approaching the fragmentation topic? How do you think the Commission's work will be used or should be used by regulators and policymakers? And what should be the next steps after this kind of review?
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I wear another hat, and that's the research director of the Global Commission on Internet Governance, and we've been working at some internet governance questions since 2014, and what I've been doing is helping to commission a great deal of research on various lenses into internet governance. One of the themes that emerged very early on was concern about fragmentation and will we have a universal internet. And we did commission quite a bit of research. Some of it is available already on the ourinternet.org, that's O-U-R, internet.org website, and still more research to come, including some of the items that we're discussing here today. I just wrote a paper that organizes all of that research. It's an introduction to a volume that's coming out, and I decided to call it One Internet, an evidentiary basis for policymaking around universality and fragmentation. And I'll make a few points, raising them as questions here. One question that I'll raise is, do we have a universal internet now? Some of the work that we did looked at that issue, and there are challenges now around the issue of the internet, but these debates are not. It reminds me very much of multi-stakeholderism in that it's not a single issue. So one thing that we did is we tried to separate the fragmentation issue into various layers, the physical layer, certainly an infrastructure layer, the logical layer, the content and application layer, and also the legal layer. Even though the governance and legal layers intersect with all of them, these are just loose organizational categories to understand this. And when you look at that, we have a lot of barriers to universality now. At the content layer with censorship, at the logical layer with some of the challenges around IPv4 versus IPv6. Certainly at the legal layer, we have a lot of challenges. And at the physical layer too, where half the world is connected, and there are different kinds of speed problems and access rate differences around the world. But with all that in mind, all of that is moving towards a universal internet. It's moving towards universality. But there are new things, some which will be discussed here in the panel, that have to do more with exogenous factors, such as politically driven data localization requirements, such as new kinds of technological environments, particularly in the Internet of Things, that are creating interoperability challenges that we haven't had in more recent years. So there are these external categories and things that are putting pressure on the internet. And what the Commission tried to do, and the final report is not out yet, but trying to come up with policy recommendations, like a baseline characteristics of, in this particular area, internet universality at all of those different layers. So the question is, how do we continue moving towards a universal network and not towards fragmentation? And I'd be happy to discuss some of those in the question and answer as well.
Thank you. And Kathy, so I mentioned before, I think ISOC is sort of the spiritual home of the internet for many people. And your website says the world's trusted independent source of leadership for internet policy, technical standards, and future development. So that's a pretty lofty mission, self-selected. What's the appropriate response to all the fragmentation we just heard about?
First, again, thank you for inviting me, and David, thank you always.
Mr. Mike.
Better?
1 second.
Hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Remember where that came from. I'm sorry. It's a real pleasure for me at this point in my career, after having served in government. You did forget to talk, and Pepper will just be crazy about this. That it was during the Kennard regime that Pepper and I put out the first papers on what was this internet and why we shouldn't regulate it. And we like to let everybody know that, don't we? Yeah. So the Internet Society is indeed I don't know, spiritual, that's a big word, but it was born of the Internet. The Internet Engineering Task Force, which is the premier open standard body of the Internet, resides inside the Internet Society. I don't think people understand that. So it has a very technical basis. The chapters, of which David is the leader here in this city, we have now about 113 chapters in 95 countries around the world. And those chapters are made up of activists like David and others, and very much in different places in the development of the Internet, all of which are dedicated to having the Internet everywhere for everyone, an open, globally connected Internet. It is one of the great inspirations for me to meet people who are still striving very hard for this notion that we should all be connected, and that we should have end-to-end connectivity without the interference of any other source between me and you anywhere in the world. It is still a lofty goal, and is still one that we ascribe to. In our mind, so 25 years ago, here was this organization that was just starting to talk about what is the Internet. Now, what is the problem, or what is the issues in the 21st century, knowing what we know now and where the Internet is? In our view, there are two. The greatest source of fragmentation in the world is the fact that only half the world is on the Internet. The other half of the world is not. And the dislocation that creates in terms of economic dislocation, social dislocation, the opportunities that can be provided and benefits, we think is an existential threat to the Internet itself. Because without everyone on the Internet, we suffer from the have and have not problem that we see today. The second real threat is the security issue. And I'll tell you why in a minute, and I think we all know why. One, this was a best efforts technology. It's a network of networks. We knew from the beginning that there were issues and vulnerabilities in this network, and as the world comes on this network, we know that these vulnerabilities have caused some vibrations with respect to trusting the thing itself. And we know that governments have decided to use that issue as the one that, by the way, they thought all along that maybe we shouldn't be all connected. So some governments say security is the issue that will finally fragment this thing so that we can get it back, so that we can have sovereign authority over this borderless network of networks. We believe that we have to, it's a complex issue, that it is one that's going to take creative collaboration across borders, and it is that at that global level, so at the local level we got to have it, and at the global level we have to ensure that this network remains interconnected across the world. Danny mentioned earlier about the WSIS victory we had, I think, in New York in last year in November. which was immediately followed by pushback that this multi-stakeholder model that we believe is the source of collaboration around the world is under attack. Well, we won that argument. The world's 193 countries stood up and said, that's what we believe. And now we have to show that it works. We have to show that it works on complex issues. We have to show that it works across borders and globally, and that we can make this truly a bottom-up, end-to-end global phenomena that benefits everyone.
Thanks. So I'm going to go take one more tour at the top, and then I'm going to come back to you. Okay. So Jeremy, or just going back to you, Jeremy, from the OECD perspective, we've heard a bunch of numbers, McKinsey and other reports, and we've heard assertions of damage between half the population not connected to the internet and the other half is. Can you share a little bit of insight from the OECD perspective about tools that might be able to bring to bear to address some of these fragmentation issues more rapidly than we currently are?
Sure. Well, one of the purposes of our work that we're doing right now is to try to build more of an evidence base about, well, we're really approaching it from the openness side as opposed to the fragmentary side, but it's just two sides of the same coin. So one thing that the committee that I'm working for wanted was to go beyond just like opinions and beliefs, of which there are many out there about openness and its impact, and start to collect evidence, both quantitative and qualitative. So you asked, what are we bringing to bear? One of the things I've learned in working on internet openness for the past year or so is that it is an absolutely enormous topic, and it could keep an army of academics busy for many, many years. And hopefully it will keep the OECD busy for a long time, because it's very important. But what I'm driving at is that the work we're doing now is really just the first step. We're assembling building blocks for compiling more evidence in more focused ways in the future. However, in this work, we have managed not only to do a stock taking of some of the empirical and qualitative evidence that's already out there, but also to begin to collect our own evidence, starting with trying to get an idea of how important openness is, using cross-border data flows as a proxy for openness. And so we've been working with a number of private sector companies who have global internet businesses to get their cooperation in sharing some of their data with us so that we can use it to begin to fill out a picture of how important openness is and maybe some of the trends that are developing. For example, one of the trends we wanted to look at was whether internet users are increasingly accessing content from countries outside their own. I don't think I'm going to get in trouble by saying that based on the data we've collected so far, that yes, that there is a trend of that happening, which is one out of a million possible different indications of the importance of openness. In the future, we hope to refine our approaches in coming up with proxies not only for overall openness, but a more fine-tuned approach that gets at some of the individual components of openness as we've defined it.
Thanks. So Daniel, the paper that we talked about before, that was one thing as part of this broader Future of the Internet project, which is looking at a number of indicators. And all of this, I understand, is sort of geared towards pushing the idea of universality and openness and interconnectedness further forward on a global basis. Can you share a little bit how you see that the overall Future of the Internet project coming together in this regard, and sort of the actions that you expect to come out of the work?
Right. Well, what forum does the best is really to bring the stakeholders together and to address the most permanent issues of today. In the past, we were talking about the future of the internet as technology, but what we're trying to move towards is more about the fact that it's as much about the society as it is about the technology. So we had all these work streams that addressed the evidence-based, that tried to give a little bit more effort for connectivity. We worked very closely with the State Department and ISOC and other partners on making a lot of things happening, and we applaud all these efforts. What we're trying to do is really to bring this to the global audience, and very diverse global audience. We also want to make sure that we acknowledge some concerns that may be coming from different actors, different companies, different governments, and so on. But we also want to engage them in the conversation and see. Bottom line is, in order to create value, data has to flow. How this happens, we just need to come together and talk about it at all the levels, and the engineer level that actually has technical tools and capabilities to make it happen, but also at the leadership level. And we're seeing the fundamental change. In the past, it was a geeky kind of side corner conversation, but now everybody wants to talk about it with various degrees of familiarity with the issues. And that's what the report tried to do. It's actually, we don't give recommendations. We're just trying to highlight certain issues that people should be talking about. We will continue doing that moving forward, and we're very much looking forward to getting everybody on as part of this conversation.
Great. And Laura, so you mentioned technical fragmentation, and specifically IPv4 and v6, which is partly, it's a fragmentation by design or by misdesign, depending on maybe how you want to think about it. But can you talk a little bit about how you see the industry and sort of the entire internet community dealing with that? Because as I at least understand it today, everything's operating in parallel and between v4 and v6. How should we be looking at fixing that?
Sure. The first thing that I'd like to add to the discussion is that the fragmentation issue is not just an economic issue. It's important to remember that it's an issue also of civil liberties and freedom of expression and privacy and access to knowledge. So all of the issues, whether they're technical, logical, infrastructural, or legal, they have to do with people that are out accessing the internet, not just the digital economy. So there are a lot of very important issues on the table. The technical issue specifically around IPv6 is one of many challenges at the level of infrastructure and logical and physical resources, in which, because of design decisions that have been made, we do currently have two protocols, IPv4 and IPv6, and two internet address spaces. They can interoperate through things like, protocol conversions and network address translation and things between the two, but they're not natively backward compatible. So because of that, it is in the best interest of the digital economy and freedom of expression to just continue moving towards IPv6. It's a very interesting topic. I could actually say quite a lot about this because I wrote my doctoral dissertation on IPv6, and that was quite a long time ago, and I turned it into a book called Protocol Politics, the Globalization of Internet Governance. So this has been going on for a very long time. I think we're starting to see some uptake in adoption of IPv6, and we have to continue to see that. It's very, very important to have one IP address space. We have a lot of decentralization in the internet, and we have a lot of diversity of technologies in the internet, but there are some common critical internet resources that have to be a single space and be managed in a way that is accountable and creates the security conditions and other kinds of conditions for ongoing growth. The IP address space is one of these. So I'm optimistic it will continue growing, but the truth is we do have two different IP address spaces right now, and it's a challenge.
Okay. And Kathy, you talked a bit about the chapters and sort of the organizational structure of the Internet Society. I'm just wondering, the chapters are formed because they're kind of basically local interest groups, which are unique to areas, which at some level is a fragmentation. And And I'm just wondering if there are instances where fragmentation is a good thing and actually creates some positive benefits. And what might those be?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that construct. I think the internet is both local and global, and that is its very nature. That it happens where it grows, and it's not actually a top-down network that says, if I don't reach that person that day, then therefore I don't exist. It grows wherever it is. And so our view is that the local nature of the internet is in fact its benefit, that from anywhere I can get to anywhere else. I think in thinking about how the internet has spread across the world, it's quite fascinating if you get the map of the 17th century trade routes, and you look at the undersea cables that have been built, they almost follow each other. And so humankind has found a way to move itself, knowledge, goods, commodities, services across the world in a similar way. But the economy is local. And part of the issue we have then with half the world not being on that internet of internets, that network of networks, that they don't get the benefits of it. When I was just in Japan at the G7 ICT ministerial, and it was fascinating to me how a little island out there in the midst of other nations who are not quite as friendly to this philosophy of an open global economic benefit of a network draws itself together locally to ensure that it has that global connection. And it works hard on this. One of the things I was truly amazed and inspired by was their IPv6 project, where they, through a multi-stakeholder process, brought people together to say, we really need to fix this because we believe it'll make us economically stronger in order to do that, and socially stronger. So these things work together.
Great. So, and Danny, you talked a little bit about Global Connect in your discussion earlier. I'm wondering if could you share a little bit more about really two things. One is what are you ultimately trying to achieve with Global Connect, and how can people in this room and others participate? And the other is, can you talk a little bit more about the tension between sovereignty concerns and openness and universality, and how maybe those bridges could be created?
Okay, those are two different questions. Starting with Global Connect, what we've tried to do, the goal of Global Connect is to elevate the issue and break it out of the silo of a conversation between specialists in communications. That connectivity and digital connectivity is critically important to every sector of the economy and to the development of countries. And so what we'd like to do is obviously not exclude communications ministers from that conversation, or the communications community from that conversation. They will still drive the actual development and deployment of services around the world, but to bring into that conversation ministries of finance, heads of state, and the development banks and the development community to start thinking about connectivity as not a luxury, but a necessity. And what that means from a budgetary perspective, what that means from not just a communications policy perspective, but from an education policy perspective, from a taxation policy perspective, from an innovation policy perspective, is critically important. And so it's in part an effort to elevate the conversation. And we did that most effectively and most recently through the World Bank. Now, Microsoft has multiple white space initiatives around the world and is doing great work, by the way, in multiple parts of the developing world. And there are separate efforts being made by other companies, other donor communities and donor nations, and bringing that all under an umbrella is critically important. So the world is going to continue connecting people to the internet. Industry will continue driving innovation in the space. Our goal is to ensure that not only do we get 1.5 billion more people on the internet, but that we are targeting and working with those who want to connect the hardest to reach, and that we are targeting and working with those in countries where they need assistance, where they need technical assistance in order to make that happen, both from a legal and policy perspective as well as from an actual technical perspective. And so that's the Global Connect initiative effort. In terms of the relationship between sovereignty and the potential fracturing of the internet, the fragmentation of the internet, there are and there will continue to be nation states, and we as public servants who work in our governments feel a very strong responsibility to ensure that our constituents are protected and safe, and that if business or activity is conducted within the four corners of our nation, that activity respects our laws. And that's true in every country. All public officials feel that way. And the divisions of jurisdictional application and the way that people use the internet outside of your jurisdictional authority and how that affects those within your jurisdictional authority has become a true and large global challenge that we work on across governments and also within the multi-stakeholder community. So in order to bring solutions to bear, we have to make our systems of governing or law and regulation interoperable in order to retain the experience as unitary, right? And that's what we're trying to do with the privacy shield. That's what we try to do in other spaces as well. Where we really push back is on the argument or the idea that national sovereignty gives countries the power to keep people from either being able to access information or send information across borders, and that it gives them the ability to control how people use the network, either for parochial protectionist interests or for authoritarian purposes. We don't believe that there's a national sovereign right to the violation of basic human rights.
Good. I'd like to give the audience the opportunity for questions, if there are any. Let's see, this right here. There's a microphone will come along. I don't think it's on.
Last week, as you may know, Russia and China had a big forum in Moscow, the first one. And next day, China passed a law regarding NGOs and internet. The point I want to make is a strong mobilization after quite a few months of preparation. What I would suggest, I used to run a few European Commission projects. I think it's high time to mobilize United States, European Union, and Japan at least, market economies. Organize a task force in a matter of 2 months, if I may put it that way, and try to prepare projects with multi-stakeholder. What are the implications? Because things are running very quickly even on Indian side, but on Russia and China side, they decided to have some research and development project preparation. So I'm concerned, I know a little bit both countries, and I'm concerned that we will be too late. So a quick task force in a matter of 1 month, 2 months, to see what are the implications. All issues are very important, but now we need a mobilization which should have an impact also international organizations like UNESCO and others. I hope it makes sense. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any comment?
I think the issues are multiplying. I think that news is distressing. I think it's not the only place in the world we're seeing some distressing news about what I think is a fear of this technology that is, as Laura says, quite powerful, right? It provides great opportunities for individuals and communities to organize, to speak. And so, yes, we have to keep speaking about this, engaging with those countries who would suggest that this is a better way, which we do at the Internet Society. We have a chapter in Russia. We talk with China. We talk with Turkey. We are on the ground in all kinds of places where things are sometimes very tough for users. We want to keep reiterating our principles and not getting lost in a lot of the discussion in my mind around, which product is what. what we want is a globally connected, open internet where people can come together to express themselves, to organize, etc. And so, yes, we do need to mobilize around those issues.
Okay. And with the Heather. Yeah.
Hi, Vern Wendt here from National Defense University. So I've heard a lot of talk about the haves and have-nots, but it also seems like those that are connected to the internet, there's also seems to be a little bit more of a gradation, and it touches on the nation state, it touches on the technical, it touches on the ability, and that's if you have an open space, there are those that are going to use it for however they choose to use it, and the example that comes to mind is ISIS. So if you have a weak nation state that is not going to enforce its laws, and you have an organization that's going to use its technical prowess to go ahead and exploit the openness, how is policy addressing that, and how is your respective organizations addressing that?
Sure. Let me come in here. Thank you for actually bringing the topic of granularity. This is such a complex space and an issue where I believe, although it was born in the binary world, the ones and zeros, it's actually now moved into quantum. It can be one and zero at the same time. And at the forum, that's where we try to bring all these conversations together. We don't always succeed, but we are really certainly try to maintain that. So, for example, again, the report has been put together by 3 authors, but it involved a very, very diverse group of stakeholders, and many in the room have been part of this process. That's kind of where we come in and try to move agenda on this. But we have many other groups. One of the groups at the forum is called Global Agenda Council on Cybersecurity. That's where the issue of use of ICT by terrorists, for example, is being addressed. I believe the United Nations Security Council also had a special briefing on that in December last year, where for the first time they're trying to approach this from a comprehensive point of view, and the council played a role there. But at the end of the day, you know, somebody brought in, I think Cassie brought in the point of the fear of technology. And my favorite story when I hear that is always the house department story. I don't know, maybe some of you have already heard, but the first escalators in the world were introduced in the house department store in 1860, and with such an innovation that the house had actually, and this is obviously touches on the debate whether the internet destroys or creates jobs. I believe new technology always creates new jobs, because house had to hire 2 new shop assistants to greet the people that were arriving on the top of the escalator with the sniffing salts for ladies and some brandy for gentlemen. Now, as much as we would like, some of us would like to have a brandy every time we take escalators, obviously that's not the case anymore. But I think this is where we just have to, get adjusted to the use of technology and address it from multiple angles.
I think it was an excellent point raised. It's always the case that the same exact technologies that enable freedom of expression can be used in very nefarious ways, no matter what technology we're talking about. But I think that the point raises like a fourth component to the policy principles that is absolutely necessary for moving forward with the possibility for a universal internet. So in addition to the infrastructure improvements and improving access, in addition to the preservation of the multi-stakeholder model, and in addition to the innovation aspects around this, such as permissionless innovation and people being able to connect and sell things and express, so economic and expressive liberty. There's this other component that's necessary for keeping and preserving and promoting an internet that is universal, and that has to do with trust. And there was recently a poll done by the Center for International Governance Innovation, and it was an CG Ipsos poll. It was published through the Global Commission on Internet Governance, polled 23,000 users around the world in 24 countries. And it is true that there's some loss of trust because of things like the ISIS example that you gave, but also because of the massive data breaches, also because of disclosures about expansive surveillance. And I think that it's an important overlay onto this discussion to say that in addition to these other aspects of preserving a universal internet, infrastructure, multi-stakeholderism, and innovation, that the promotion of trust and that cybersecurity, that's cooperation between different countries, that is an important overlay on the discussion.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So here, then we say, and so what do we do about it? And how do we progress? And I think for me and for those of us who are facing the reality of this situation, the issue is still the same. There's no silver bullet here. This is a complex network of networks, a complex network of people, and that we have to bring ourselves to the table in the same way we do on any internet issue, and that is through a collaborative process. So we've gone out with a paper called Collaborative Security, and start talking about what does that mean in this ecosystem, and where does one locally, nationally, internationally bring the relevant stakeholders together to start actually having these in-depth discussions. What we don't think should happen is that governments decide there's one way, and the way is to shut it down, shut it off, put the people in jail, let's just stop this. That's not the way. The way is to bring to the table those who have the expertise to start to know how to fix some of those vulnerabilities, those who understand how it's used, law enforcement for sure, but also technologists, also human rights folks, also people who care about using it for economic reasons, and to get a clear-eyed view of how we attack this and to restore the trust. We are there on this, and we believe there's a way, talk about mobilizing, that we need to mobilize a new way of thinking about how to address it.
So obviously outside of the terrorists themselves, there's no one that supports the terrorist use of the internet. So we've cooperating with network owners, network operators, service operators. They don't want their property and their services used for these purposes. And I think that with collaborative cooperation and the ideas that Kathy has talked about, there is an opportunity and ways, tactics to isolate and to ensure that this kind of content isn't reaching vulnerable communities and vulnerable individuals. We also have to remember, and the Secretary of State hosted a Countering Violent Extremism Summit, of which a component of that was how do you do counter narratives to the narrative that ISIS is sending out over the internet to people. We don't want to leave communities digitally isolated because we believe that those communities will be targeted by ISIS. We want to make sure that communities where there's a lack of opportunity, where there's a lack of access to information, get that access to information. And so it's a really complex and hard challenge, and I can tell you that I sit in the economic bureaus where we predominantly are concerned about the utility of the networks for wealth creation and opportunity creation. I think the OECD and WEF are similarly situated. But we obviously work with our colleagues in the security community whose mission is critically important, and we want to work with them, and we do work with them in a proactive fashion to ensure that we're trying to address these issues in as least intrusive a way on technology and the users of the internet.
Thanks. Jeremy, did you have a comment?
Yes, thanks. I guess the question for us is, what is the OECD doing about this issue that you flagged? I mean, it's clear that openness brings with it a number of challenges as well as benefits. And the real question is how best to respond to them. So right now, as Ambassador Sepulveda mentioned, countries don't always agree on how best to respond to some of the challenges, or even on how much they want to lean towards or away from openness in general. So what are we doing about that? We're trying to build up some evidence to put in front of them that they can use when they're trying to argue their positions with each other, so that they have more than just their own opinion or their own cultural bias in some cases towards more or less openness, and instead they can point to some data and other kinds of evidence and saying, hey, look, you know, if you take these policy actions that wind up closing off the internet in this manner, here's what you can expect to happen to things like international trade or macroeconomic performance or social well-being or innovation or entrepreneurship. The other thing is that one of the hypotheses that we're looking at in our work is that taking actions that affect openness can have unintended consequences. And so if we can demonstrate that with evidence and get countries to think about those ramifications, if they're considering taking actions that tend towards closing, then we'll have advanced things. because perhaps some of those actions are avoidable or can be done in a way that doesn't close off so many of the benefits. I mean, just to give a hypothetical example, if a country is worried about the impact of content, certain content that's available on YouTube, and the response is to just entirely block YouTube, they have to take into account that one of the things they're doing is shutting off access to a lot of free educational opportunities out there that are available for YouTube. And presumably that's not something that they want to do. So we want to start compiling the necessary evidence to get them to think about it in that way.
Thanks. Back row.
Oh, hi. I'm Bill Cunningham, Creative Investment Research. We launched our website November 16th, 1995. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the IANA name transition and whether or not this increases fragmentation or decreases it, has the potential to increase or decrease fragmentation.
You want to talk to anyone? Kathy.
So I believe that it decreases the likelihood of fragmentation with a successful multi-stakeholder outcome where the community, the global community, and we need to know that it's the global community, makes decisions around what Laura called the core functions of the internet. Those are name, numbers, and protocol parameters, that those assets remain in the, if you will, under the stewardship of all of the people of the world and not any particular nation of the world. I believe that this increases the likelihood that we will have universal internet. Are there threats to that? Of course there are. There are threats to any attempt that people of goodwill make to ensure that there's open, transparent, and effective governance. But I think that this is a step in the right direction.
Right here, front row. Hi there, and thank you very much for some very interesting presentations. My name is David Sorokin. I'm a proud member of ISOC DC. I've been hearing a lot, both on the forum and just in general, about fragmentation of the internet. So I was very interested to come here today to find out if the internet is in fact fragmenting. And I wonder if I could ask the panel members to just very directly answer that question as to whether fragmentation has accelerated to the point of it being a very serious issue, and to perhaps identify a particularly egregious form of fragmentation that you see happening right now.
You're the expert.
I'd like to hear everybody's answer.
Right. Well, I'm very optimistic about the future of the internet, but I do think that there are some threats. And I think that some of them are geopolitically motivated and based on good intentions, such as concern about citizen privacy. So I would say that some of the data localization initiatives that are cropping up all over the world are something that are of particular concern to me. And there has been empirical evidence supporting that from McKinsey and beyond about how that affects companies and people. And it's not just affecting internet companies. We have to remember that all economic sectors gather data, store data, share data. And so financial services companies, academic institutions, healthcare companies are all affected by restrictions on how they can store data. So I think it creates problems economically and also technical confusion, because those kinds of bordered requirements just don't map on, putting my engineer's hat on for a moment, it just doesn't map on to how information flows and where internet exchange points are and how the domain name system works and where you can register a name. So that's one area that's on the geopolitical side. On the technical side, or maybe we could call it the market-driven side, I'm also concerned about a resurgence of proprietary standards. So the tradition of the internet has been one of having open standards that are openly published, that are developed in a participatory environment, and that then result in multiple competing products based on that standard. What we see instead is a resurgence of siloed approaches, both even in social media, even in app mediation, where things are not as interoperable as possible, but certainly in emerging areas like the Internet of Things, where not only security is an afterthought, but interoperability is an afterthought. So I think that there are things on the radar to watch very closely, but overall I'm optimistic that these other kinds of forces can push us towards universality.
Well, I don't think anyone would be here if they didn't think this is a certainly serious issue to address. In the report, and the authors have done a tremendous job at defining and summarizing discussion of very broad group of stakeholders who identified 28 potential areas of fragmentation. 12 of them were along the technical lines. I think 10 were along the potential policy, and 6 along the potential commercial trends that could lead to that. Some of them would have a more severe impact, some of it would have a little bit less of an impact. Some of it, likelihood of occurrence, it's not a binary, it's a spectrum. Some of it may be occurring and disappearing, some of it may be appearing just for a short period of time. The impact would be very different. But as I would like to join Laura and say, I'm very optimistic. I think it's too much of the gift to destroy it in a way, and everybody recognizes it's just we need to figure out the ways to advance it. And formal fora like OECD and others are doing their bit in terms of negotiations. We'd like to approach it from a very informal. We'd like to start with questions, because a lot of it is just really sitting down and talking and allowing the space for, I don't know what the policy impact of my decision may be. That type of conversation.
Jeremy?
Yes. Okay, I'll do my best to answer these in a forthcoming way. So has fragmentation accelerated to the point where it's a serious issue? Well, first I'd like to say that fragmentation, or the flip side, openness, is something that's in a constant state of flux, constantly increasing in certain dimensions and declining or decreasing in other dimensions. So it's in a multi-dimensional space, so it's a really difficult concept to envision, but it is constantly changing. As to the overall net effect of this flux, is it overall increasing or decreasing? We don't know. At least the OECD doesn't know yet. Hopefully, we'll have an answer if we keep working on this in the future. But right now, I don't have enough evidence to say to answer that question. And then for the other part of your question, what's the worst fragmentary pressure? Speaking just for myself, I find it hard to disagree with the panelists who said earlier that the number one fragmentary fact or force is that half the world doesn't even have access to the internet. So they don't have anything. Compared to that, it's kind of hard to complain about certain content getting blocked off or whatever, because for them, everything is blocked off. And I would also agree that the number two is digital security. But the good news is that there are solutions either already out there or on the way for both of these things.
You have to remember that the internet is not fragmented as a function of voluntary decisions.
Right.
Networks are voluntarily connected to each other. So, and we all voluntarily resolve to the same root addresses. The IP address is coordinated centrally by ICANN. The fact that there aren't national intranets that operate outside of that system it's a voluntary choice. There is a self-interest in the preservation and the promotion of the non-fragmented internet. Now, we have to continue making the case for that. I believe that wherever you see the global internet deployed and adopted, it's loved. And it becomes, there are a domestic constituency for preservation exists. And so the biggest defense against fragmentation is the continued deployment of connectivity. And ensuring that people have the skills, the digital skills necessary to make the most of that connectivity, and they'll create things we've never thought of. And I think we're at a moment in time, and that there are historic traditional forces and people who are in positions of power that fear the democratization of both commerce and politics, and that it isn't necessary to fear. that this is a tool for progress, and the glass is dramatically more full than empty.
It almost sounds like you can make the case that there's less fragmentation now because there are so many more, such a larger fraction of the population is online than, say, 10 years ago.
But like I said during my speech, vigilance is necessary, because what you're seeing, I don't think that you're seeing real calls for fragmentation from a technical perspective in the sense that people want to create their own IP or their own ICANN for a specific part of the world. But what you are seeing is law and regulation affecting how people are able to use the access to the internet that they have, often with good intentions, right? But I do fear data localization movements. I do fear technological mandates that are built on top of the language of national security, often, or even in privacy regimes, often very laudable goals whose public end is noble and we should help pursue, but not through technical mandates or the breaking of what works about the internet. And there is a space there for solutions. It's hard, but we have to continue working.
You have other people. I mean, I think
There's one over in the back corner that's been waiting.
Thank you. I'm Kim Betcher, Center for International Private Enterprise. I'd like to raise the Open Government Partnership, which is a forum for governments and civil societies to address freedom of information, open access, and innovation around citizenship. To what extent do you think the OGP can be helpful in moving this conversation forward? And specifically, what might it do?
So let me speak in generalities then a little bit. I think to continue on the last conversation, all of this has to do with intentionality. Danny's right, this is all voluntary. These are all agreements that we make on a voluntary basis to be connected one with the other. So an open government forum where we say that we voluntarily want to do this, I think would be an important and good force in the world. We could use that right now for governments to understand that it's to their benefit to interconnect, to be connected, to have transparency, to understand and see who their stakeholders are, to understand that what their roles are in this ecosystem. There is much to do in terms of coming from a different angle, in my view, on good government and the reform that needs to take place, my view, in the digital age. I think governments have not figured out yet what their own governance processes and procedures are in a very different world where their citizens have access to information, knowledge that was never before available to them. And that forces, just like the internet has disrupted everything, it disrupts the way government does its work. And I'm becoming very convinced that the next reform movement really has to be not in internet governance, but in governance, in the way governments operate, in relationship to their citizens who are interacting with it in a very different way. So if you want to talk about it, I'd go on and on.
Right. There were some other questions over that side.
Ron De Silva, Group Vice President of Network Engineering at Time Warner Cable, but also ICANN International Board Member. And well, first I want to say thanks, Kathy, to the response to the inquiry about fragmentation and its dependency on the HANA transition. Couldn't have said it any better, thank you. But I want to go back to technical fragmentation, something, Laura, you said about V4 and V6, and there is today a pretty significant marketplace that has been created because of this lack of dual stack everywhere. And a number of V4 addresses are being basically sold out of the North American market into European, Asian, Latin American markets because there's lack of resources there in V4 space. Obviously, this is maybe a point in time. Maybe that free market environment is okay. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But really, what I think is more important is there's fragmentation there. There are some people who don't have V4 and can't reach the rest of the internet, or if they are only on V6, only parts of the internet are reachable because of lack of enough addressing. So the question I think for the panel then is, in this address fragmentation space, how do we get more advocacy out there? Because part of the issue is there's a lot of content, there's a lot of consumer equipment, there are parts and pieces of the internet that are not making the migration, they're not making it fast enough. How do we get more advocacy out there to close that gap and get rid of that piece of fragmentation? Thanks.
Can I just, having just sat with our friends in Japan, I honestly was quite inspired by what they're doing on this very issue. And what is it? It's under the mantle of the Internet of Things, of their digital future, as they say. This is about the digital future. There are two problems. One, IPv6, IPv4. It's got to get fixed. And number two, security. So they have two working groups going that are both technical folks, the governance folks, and the government guys sitting in the room saying, how do we do this? And business, by the way. Until business decides it's going to make this transition, which costs it money, and it says it doesn't recover, then we're stuck. But if we see the incentive for in this new world where everything's connected, it cannot be connected without the numbers. And so we need this to have happen. So how can we show what the incentives are for the very people who have to make the changes and have the rest of the community actually, and government sometimes, do a little pushing that this has really got to happen for a healthy future. I really like what they're doing. I'm trying to get them. I think they're going to publish what they've done and post it on the ISOC chapter website. So watch that space. I was hoping that we would get it up there and others could see it.
Okay, we have time for two more, I think. Right, one right here.
Richard Bennett with American Enterprise and High Tech Forum. On the question of the IPv6 transition, Apple just announced a couple of days ago that after a certain date, they're going to stop accepting apps for the App Store that will not run in an IPv6 only environment. Of course, they can do that because the App Store is not open, which is kind of ironic. But the larger question is, when we talk about fragmentation, it's the opposite of openness. Openness is good, fragmentation is bad. Openness has another opposite, and that's privacy, which is good, right? So in order for this conversation to move forward, I think it's important to draw that distinction between privacy and fragmentation and what the difference, is, and why one's good and the other's bad. And I'm not sure how to do that, but I think it sort of begins with individual choice. Like legitimate privacy is when I decide what personal information I'm going to share and what I'm not going to share. And fragmentation seems to be what happens when Big Brother decides what I'm going to share and what I'm not going to share, and we get data localization mandates that restrict cross-border data flows and mess everything up. Is that a reasonable framing? That's my question.
Yeah, that's exactly the word that I used in my paper, One Internet, is the idea of choice, is being able to have choice. It's not only important to acknowledge that we don't have a universal internet now and go through all the layers and the problems that we have and opportunities that we have now, but also to acknowledge that in some cases we want to have fragmentation. We want to have the ability to implement security. If you're looking at a financial system, we don't want to have the same kind of openness as we would have on like accessing Wikipedia. So if you look at that, that has to do with the choice of the consumer and the kinds of services that we purchase, procure, use, and also the ability of the provider to implement things like the necessary security and pulling the bridge up when necessary. So I think the choice framing is a good one. I decided to start, I'm working on a new book, and I just decided to start it with a sentence that the internet is no longer a communication network. It's a control network as well as a communication network that's connecting more things and people. So tying this back into the IPv6 argument, when we have more than 50 billion objects on the internet, the choice will be the market choice to move to IPv6. That's another example of that. There really won't be any possibility to do anything other than use IPv6 as more things come online than people, and that trajectory continues.
Right. I think your framing is actually pretty good. I'm not sure I agree that privacy is the enemy of openness. The degree to which you can control your ability to share your own information may actually encourage you to share more information than you otherwise would. So I think that one of the key things that we try to think about when we talk about the privacy issues is to not to protect people from themselves and not to discourage the sharing of information, but to empower people to control what they do or do not share. And that's within a spectrum of risk associated with harm. Not saying that there is such a thing as sort of harmless sharing. There may very well be, but that's for you to determine as an individual when you're engaging with others in the distribution and collection and use of your information. But this is one of the hardest issues on the international scale to deal with and discuss, because it is so complicated. There are so many cultural differences in the relationship of the degree of sensitivity that people have to the way that they're exposed to others. And there's also just some degree of misunderstanding or a lack of appreciation of the full benefits that come from data sharing. And that there has to be, I think that we make a mistake when we discourage people from engaging in the exchange of information. And we should be encouraging the use of technology and encouraging the exchange of information.
Okay, so I'll take one last question and then I'll ask the panelists each to give a final parting thought.
Great, thank you. I really appreciated the note about the lack of access being the greatest threat to fragmentation. And I was thinking about that and seeing how one could argue that, on the other side, the increasing number of users creates a greater diversity of the means of connecting to the internet, and thus that creates a new dynamic for fragmentation to then occur at the point of access rather than at the kind of core part. And I guess I wanted to ask the panel to see who do you think is responsible for addressing that element? And since we've been talking a lot about a digital economy, who do you think is economically responsible in particular? Thank you.
I'm sorry, who's economically responsible for what now? For ensuring that people have access?
Yeah, for ensuring people have access, or I guess in the sense that most of us, I would hope, agree that increasing access to internet is a good thing. Who's responsible for ensuring that that dynamic of the multiplicity of connecting to the internet doesn't then motivate fragmentation, but maintains the web as an open space?
That's a good question. I think that, to use a phrase, it's all of our responsibility to try to achieve that. And as you pointed out, there are network effects to the connectivity of additional folks. Every additional person connected to the network adds value for everyone on the network. So there's a self-interest in both, from a private and a public perspective, to connect additional people. There are economics that make it very difficult. But every year, particularly in the advancements of wireless deployment, you're seeing significant advancements in connectivity. I think that there's a lot that we can do as governments to ensure that it's easier to use access to the airwaves for the delivery of services, and that new, for example, low Earth flying satellites, like what OneWeb and SpaceX and others are trying to do, that's allowed and embraced both through spectrum policy and at the national level through licensing. I think the white spaces initiatives as well as continued licensing initiatives are really important for ensuring that the cost per person is reduced for the distribution of services. And then I think that there's a lot to be done around public anchor institutions and making sure that all schools are connected and that libraries are connected. So you get, again, internal advocates, the people's kids coming home and saying, we have the internet in my school, it's really great, it's something that we should have at home as well. And people are going to have to make resource allocation decisions about that. And it may not be immediately evident that there is real utility in spending a significant portion or some portion of your budget on, as a family, on connectivity. But we're seeing that change over time. And we're seeing it change most, I think, in countries where they're really, and it's self-serving, but there's a real pro-market mechanism and embrace of finding solutions, more so than we see in places where there are monopoly services or monopoly incumbent providers who have different interests.
But we have welcomed and engaged in the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has, I think, done a fairly good job around defining and saying here are the things that have to happen in order for sustainable economic development across the world. And we want a very important piece of that, and that is to say that connecting to the internet is one of them. It is one of the foundational goals, because that is the tool that allows you to do medicine and healthcare and all of the things that we know are going to raise the bar for those countries that may not be market-based economies, but where money and resources and the kind of sort of coalition of companies you're now seeing in governments like the United States that said, we actually have to attend to this issue. We actually do need to connect the whole world. I have seen more people raise their hand on this issue than I have in the last 10 years since the goals have been put on the table. And I'm convinced it's because there are other wealth pockets. In other words, if we actually had medicine across the world, maybe I could sell my drugs. You know, if we actually had education across the world, I would be in business doing that. If we actually had this happening, I could do mining. I could do other things. So I'm actually seeing now this little connection that for the first time in a very long time, I'm thinking maybe this can start to move the ball a little bit.
Closing thought, is that what?
Yep.
Okay.
So parting thought?
Certainly. I'd like to leave one closing thought that really hasn't come up in this exact framing, and it has to do with a trend from governance of the internet, the concern with keeping the internet operational, and then governance using the internet, such as even censorship, you know, good or bad purposes, to something that is of concern and related to fragmentation, and that's governance by tampering with the infrastructure of the internet. So I think data localization is an example of that. The desire to build backdoors into encryption and modifying standards would be an example of that, and other kinds of things, local redirection in the domain name system. So these are things that are actually tampering with the technical infrastructure of the internet in a way that could be a concern and could lead towards fragmentation. So I would like to just leave with that thought that that's something as well to look at as we continue the discussion on fragmentation.
Jeremy, do you want to offer a parting thought?
Sure. My last thought or comment is just to take the opportunity to encourage everyone to keep an eye on our next ministerial meeting on the digital economy, which is going to take place next month in Cancun, Mexico. And the title of the meeting is Digital Economy, Innovation, Growth, and Social Prosperity. That is where we're going to debut the work that we've been doing on internet openness, among many other topics related to the digital economy. So please keep an eye on it.
Right. Daniel?
I think one key issue is also a brief example. President Evers always talks about the fragmentary practices of cultures, where you have technological-based cultures and kind of humanitarian-based cultures. And I think, in one hand, yes, it's true, and it's maybe divergence continues. But on the other hand, there are many examples where we're marrying law and technology, where policy now so understands the technological underpinning that it actually tries to influence it. And I just want to applaud again all the stakeholders that are really interested in the issues, writing more about it. Laura, everyone in the panel, Joanna, I see in the audience. There's so many examples. I think this is not just one look at the time. It's going to be continuous, and we just have to be vigilant. To second the ambassador's remarks.
I would agree. I think when you have a voluntary network of networks, the way we have, of human beings and technology layered one on the other, it takes an intentional act upon our part to make sure that we extend this, that we keep on innovating, and that we actually stick with the underlying principles that make this thing work, both the technological principles and I think the social connectivity principles that are at the heart of the internet.
And you get the last word.
Well, thank you. First, I am vice chairing the OECD Ministerial in Cancun, not because it's in Cancun, although that doesn't hurt, but we're very, very excited about this event and would hope that you all would participate as well. We're also very supportive of the work that the WEF is doing, and I think that the WEF's ability to convene non-traditional stakeholders into this conversation is critically important. I would also say, however, that we need to not cease engagement of those who disagree with us. So, for example, last week I was at the WSIS Forum, and that is an aggregation of significantly a large number of ministers that don't go to events like the Internet Governance Forum, or don't go to events where there's an equality of stakeholders sitting down at a meeting, but they are critically important people to engage, and we will continue to engage respectfully and in multiple venues our colleagues who are not yet on the same page as us. And that includes those who are very far from where we are, like Russia and China, for example, and those that are somewhere between us and Russia and China. I think, for example, South Africa could be a country where there's an immense amount of creativity and ingenuity, where the government as a whole has not embraced the multi-stakeholder process, or in Indonesia, where you're seeing the rise of proposed regulations that could have real risks to how the internet is accessed in that country, or even in Brazil, where the Marco Civil, after having made real progress at Net Mundial and elsewhere to be a real leader on these issues, you're seeing some legislative pressures there. This is going to be a market by market, venue by venue, leader by leader conversation where we have to engage everyone involved and make the best case possible that it is in their self-interest to join us in this experiment. And it is an experiment, and Professor Donardis has done really groundbreaking academic work in this space, and Kathy and Bob Pepper and others who have been working on this for a very long time. I very much appreciate, I lean on these people when I'm asked to do a job, and it is a community that is engaged in a common mission, and it's a good and honorable mission, and we appreciate all the work that you all do.
With that, thank you very much for taking the time. I hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.